Hi, everyone. Welcome to Co-Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Boston. Today, we have an amazing guest. He is a veterinarian. His name's Dr. Matt Asciutto. He also was a professional improv comedian for 7 years before he kind of accidentally got into vet school. And then he became a ER doctor who did relief work for about 5 or 6 years. He's embarking on some other new things. He has an amazing perspective on, I would say, life, but also on veterinary medicine that I found so refreshing. He's just a wonderful combination of being a creative and a science geek, I guess we'll call him. And he has his own podcast where he really celebrates veterinary medicine. It's called The Greatest Profession, so check that out. And I hope you enjoy my chat with Dr. Matt Asciutto. Welcome to Co-Medicine.
Thank you.
I usually like to start with the medical origin story, but that doesn't make sense for you because you had a whole career before going into medicine. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah, my medicine origin story is just like happenstance. It just sort of like stumbled into veterinary medicine.
I love that because so many people, it's like their lifelong dream and they like worked for years to get it. And you're like, oh no, I just, now I'm a doctor.
I know. And I felt so bad. Like I didn't know that. Like when I was in vet school, I found out for the first time that it was hard to get into vet school.
Really?
So, yeah.
You were like, oh, this seems like a good thing to do.
Well, I mean, okay. So from the origin story of that, I'm like 28. The girl that I was with at the time, we were in a long-term relationship and she wanted to be a vet and she applied to a bunch of schools. UT, University of Tennessee is where she got in. That was like the place we wanted to go. So we went and I was like, I would rather be with somebody like in the same profession as somebody I'm in a relationship with, as opposed to like going out into the world and doing two separate things. Because everything up until that point, we had just lived, I don't know, we'd been working so hard and it felt like our lives were totally separate. And so I'm like, this is a good way to kind of come together. So it was purely that. It was like, oh, that's it for a girl. Yeah. Yeah.
And this girl, fast forward, is not your wife.
No.
No. That was just her. People have different roles. They come into your life for different reasons.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we were together for 12 years and a lot of who I am as a human being is because of her.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. But like 3 days before I graduated from vet school, I found out that the like relationship was not going to work.
Oh.
So like that's when everything kind of fell apart. And so then my first year as a veterinarian was like ER doctor, but also trying to like work on this thing, but also, doing a teaching fellowship.
Wow.
The relationship didn't work out, but the career has stuck.
Well, that's good. I always think people are brought into your life for a reason. I like to think that, although I don't know, maybe that goes against other things I've said. That's beautiful. So were you in the same class?
No, she went in. Yeah, she got in and I was like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. And it also, I mean, I will say that my childhood was focused on neurology. Like I was always sort of in the medical sciences. So there's a guy named V.S. Ramachandran who wrote the book Phantoms of the Brain. And when I was a kid, my mom actually did some work with him. My mom's a speech pathologist. And when I was a kid, I loved those stories. And it's like Oliver Sacks stuff. It's all this like guy gets into a car accident, hits his head, no longer recognizes his family. And it's like, oh, this little bridge that connects, the fusiform gyrus to whatever, the limbic system somewhere. I forget. But I mean, that stuff was so interesting to me. And that's what the plan was. I went to UCSD as an undergrad because I'm like, I'm going to do neuroscience. But I don't know, life has different ideas. And I like just never, when I graduated from undergrad, I applied to like the top 8 of the top 10 neuroscience programs. And I like didn't get in. I'm like, well, I guess it's not for me. So I just like did other stuff for a while. But yeah, medicine was always in the background in my mind, but this was kind of it's like a way to do it in a flexible, there's like so much opportunity in veterinary medicine. There's like so many things you can do even with the DVM. It was like almost a way of me getting all of that flexibility, not really deciding what I was going to do, staying in the medical realm and also following a girl. Like it made sense for other reasons, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I'm kind of fascinated though, because what you just said, I think a lot of veterinarians, especially early career, they don't know that the DVM is a flexible degree.
Mm-hmm.
And to a lot of veterinarians, it feels like a very inflexible degree. Maybe me, I don't know, but like their identity is very attached to being a clinical veterinarian. And it's like, no, you're a clinical veterinarian. And if you've been a small animal veterinarian for 5 years, like, how would you ever go back and be a horse vet? You know what I mean? Whereas
Right.
you're like, this is a very flexible degree that I can.
Yeah.
How did you know that?
I don't know. I think I transposed that belief from MD. I feel like MDs can, they can teach, they can write books, they can like start these businesses, they can practice medicine. Once you have that doctor, in front of you, then you can do kind of all of those things. However, the thing that's against sort of the flexibility of an MD is all this crazy regulation and the insurance stuff. And, that limits their ability to practice, which I did see firsthand with my mom. I mean, she was working in these hospitals and it was just like, she was a single mom. I was an only child basically for, a long period of time. And so I would hang out in these hospitals and like, talk to nurses and talk to doctors. And a lot of them just did not seem happy. And a lot of them were very frustrated with like management. You learn a lot as a wallflower, in a hospital like that. Whereas with vet med, it's like you don't have any of those regulations in the same way. You're more, unfettered. And I think that either I happen to know that. I did have a friend who was a veterinarian that I did improv with. I had already made the decision by the time I involved him. So, but I saw that like he was doing improv and he was, owning a practice. So I don't know how I knew it, but I just sort of, I assumed that, hey, doctor, you can do a lot of things. Hey, veterinarian, you can do a lot of things, but also you don't have like these big regulations against you.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you knew that.
I think that we all in life, right? Like I don't know, we attach on to this idea of some sort of career or a life where it's like, oh, this is exactly, as I get into my 30s, I better have a family or else, I'm behind the game. And I think we all sort of look at life that way in some way, and it becomes very rigid. But as it turns out, we could just wander into the woods and that's it. Look, that could be the rest of your life, right? So like anywhere in between is a possibility as well. I think it's just we have to kind of realize that.
Okay, you're blowing my mind a little bit. I'm going to be honest. I've never met a veterinarian who thinks this way, ever.
Well, and I'm like an accidental veterinarian, right?
I think that's why.
Maybe.
No, it's good. I mean, it's very good. It's excellent. I'm glad you're here.
Well, thank you.
I mean, here right now and also in the profession. In the profesh. Glad you're part of the profesh.
I appreciate that.
I'm going to keep talking about the profesh. So you graduated in 2017 and then
correct.
A lot of veterinary couples either get engaged. This is just an observation, but I've noticed they either get engaged at the end of vet school or they break up.
Yeah.
I was a breakup. There's a lot of get engaged, but there's a lot of like couple all through vet school and then done. And it's just, I guess it's just maybe didn't have time to deal with it or I don't know what that is, but I don't know. Like, I know you observed that personally, but I've observed it in other veterinarians. Just a big like moment. You have to decide what you're doing, I guess,
Yeah. You're also in this weird cauldron of stress where you're dealing with, you have so much that's on your plate. You have a very small amount of your life that's left over to take care of this relationship. And it almost is, I feel like if it's a new relationship, you make that time. Whereas an old relationship, it's really easy to just sort of be like, we'll go shopping for groceries on Sunday and that'll be like our time together. And so a lot of stuff can like build and fester without even realizing it. And it's not like it's conflict. It's just extreme unhappiness.
Which you push down, which you bottle up, push it down, and you go steady. That's what you do.
Yeah. I mean, truthfully, I was surprised by it. When it happened to me, I was like, I wasn't happy in that moment. Like in retrospect, I wasn't happy, but I didn't realize that it was like ending. Because it was just kind of, it's like you're 12 years in, you just sort of see it as like, once this is over, everything's going to be great. But it's like, it's like you're in that war movie, right? It's like, oh, when I get out of here, I'm going to have a big hot dog from Charlie's and then
get home to my sweetheart.
Right.
I can't do the accent as well as you.
So it did feel a little bit like that.
Oh.
To your point, absolutely. I like towards the end, and this is the last 2 weeks of school. So 4 years, I'm having a conversation with, some other people about same thing, right? So like relationship troubles. And then over here, there was another person who was sitting down and she was like, gosh, I cannot believe I thought I was so alone in this. Like I felt like I was the only one who was experiencing this. And so it's like we were all in our little islands for 4 years. And it wasn't until that moment that we like realized that actually it's a common experience.
It was just like a mass breakup.
Right. I think some of them survived, some of them stayed on, some of them fell apart. Yeah.
I was a breaker-upper after vet school, but Oh, God. Well, I don't think he's listening. It's been 27 years, but
Do you have insight into why it happened?
I was moving and he wasn't. So I was like, okay. But it was a little bit like, the Seinfeld where George Costanza's, he's trying to break up with his girlfriend. I can't remember her name. And he's
Yeah,
like, I'm
Susan.
breaking up with you, Susan. And she's like, no. That's exactly what happened. I was like, well, I'm moving to Guelph and I'm breaking up with you. And then he was like, well, I'm not.
Right.
And so in his mind, we were still together. But in my mind, I was like, George Costanza. I didn't drive it home because I was like, well, whatever. I'm an intern. I will never meet anyone. And then I met my current husband. So scandal.
Scandal.
Anyway, yeah, that was my Seinfeld moment. It always makes me laugh. Life happens. I think it's interesting. I put a call out for veterinary breakups at the end of vet school. People pop in, tell us your story because now I'm very interested. So you graduated in 2017 and then did you go straight into relief vet? Did you do that? Did you go straight into that or what did you do?
No, so as it happened, there was a job in Chattanooga at a VCA hospital. There's a job at a VCA hospital that was an ER doctor gig, like it was a full salaried position. It normally would have been an internship, but they had just been acquired by VCA, so they didn't really have the infrastructure anymore. So like me and my buddy that I graduated with, we fit right into this little sweet spot of new grads who had all of the support from the internist and the oncologist and all of that kind of stuff, and the surgeons and everything, but we got a normal schedule and we got a normal salary. So,
wow.
Yeah.
It's like the best internship that was not an internship in the world.
Right. Yeah. As it turns out, like the money piece, right? Like that's not the only reason internships are terrible sometimes. So
yeah, it's one of them. It's just one of them.
It is just one of them. Yeah. For me, it was that actually, because when I graduated, I never thought I would do clinical medicine, right? Like I never thought I would be a veterinarian. So why would I do clinical medicine? To the point that when they did that, like the graduation rehearsal, the dean was like, and then Dr. Asciutto will be starting his job as an ER veterinarian in Chattanooga, Tennessee. My whole class laughed because it was obviously a joke. Like this guy who was like, oh, academia is amazing. And like, I want to do pharmaceutical research and, whatever, all that stuff. I was never going to go into practice and everyone knew it. Anyway, when I left and I did the interview and everything for this job, I told them like, hey, I want to be able to take advantage of other opportunities. Therefore, I really need to be flexible in the schedule. Specifically, I was kind of gunning for this teaching fellowship thing at Lincoln Memorial University, which I did end up getting, but it was like, I need to be able to go and do that on specific days, which they of course agreed to. And then of course, as we scheduled things out, they went back on that. So
I was going to say, wow, a new grad telling them what a world we live in. A new grad saying what their schedule's going to be. You did not graduate in 1996.
No, I didn't.
Yes. I almost fell out of my chair. I'm not going to lie. I'm sorry it didn't work out, but it's just the fact that you even felt the chutzpah to bring it up. It's awesome.
It's one of these things where I just feel like in general, it's about realizing what it is that you're actually willing to accept or what it is that you're willing to join into, right? Like if you guys aren't on the same page, it will never work out. You might as well realize that early on. Because truthfully, if they gave me that flexibility like they said that they would, I probably would have kept working there for a long period of time. They went back on it.
VCA? Are you listening?
Right. So they heard me say the thing that I needed. They said, sure, no problem, and then completely discarded it. And then as it turns out, the thing that I said was the reason that ultimately I left and they had to find new doctors. I just feel like in general, it's about figuring out what it is that you are actually willing to accept and then just telling people that.
Yeah. There's the world's simplest lesson. If you go on LinkedIn, it's like all these what do they want? It's like, oh, you could just listen to them. Yeah, that's.
What do they want? Yeah. I don't know. Ask. Have you asked?
Have you asked them? Oh, he wants a flexible schedule. He needs to be off on Thursdays.
Right.
That's all he needs. Just off on Thursdays to do his fellowship. Yeah, that's funny. I have similar experiences. Anywho, okay, so you did that for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it sounds great because when I did an internship right after vet school, and I loved a lot of things about being an intern. If the pay and the hours were better, I would do it forever because it's so interesting. It's so interesting, all the cases that you see, and it's like, I guess that's like what a hospitalist is, which we don't really have a lot of those, but that's kind of like that role is amazing. Okay, but then you decided after a period of time now, is that when you switched to doing kind of relief work?
Yeah. So I wasn't ever going to do this forever. The fact that I'm still doing medicine surprises me to this day. I'm like in talks to starting a clinic, and people, say, oh, I mean, as a veterinarian, I'm like, look, I'm not a veterinarian. I'm just a guy who happens to have the DVM who's like running this thing. I don't know.
Can we talk about this?
Yeah.
Is it out there? People listen to this. Do you know?
Well, we'll see. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we'll see what happens. But specifically with your question, so like I knew that I was not obtaining the things that I needed, and there were other things that just like philosophies on management and things that I just like wasn't on board with, where I'm like, I need to find another sort of gig. Because again, I guess like going back a little bit further, the reason that I went into any clinical medicine in the first place is so that I knew what I was talking about if I did go into academia or if I did do pharmaceutical research or something like that. I just didn't feel like I knew enough yet for me to have, that. And so for me to go to like these big companies and be like, hey, I'll peddle your product and actually know what I'm talking about. But I knew that I couldn't stay there. So for me, I like heard about this thing where they were paying per shift in Nashville, which is like 2.5 hours away. And they'll like pay your expenses if you go up there and all that stuff. I'm like, this is a magical idea. That was February of 2018. So between February and July of 2018, that's what I would do. I would have my full-time ER job, and then I would drive up and I would fill in shifts in Nashville. There were like a bunch of different hospitals in that consortium. And then I would also there's another hospital in Chattanooga that was not in my non-compete. So I could do a couple there. So I was like testing the waters. And then I was also doing my fellowship. And by the way, trying to keep the relationship alive.
A new one.
No, that same one. And then maybe
the other one.
And then like it went away. And
rekindle.
I was like, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay.
So it didn't work out.
Okay.
But yeah, so I was trying things out during that time.
Okay.
The goal was trying to see like, okay, where could I go? Like, is it medicine that I'm not good at or that I, really don't belong here? Is it ER or is it that, just this specific hospital? So that's kind of when it started. And then it was, I think, 5 months of doing it frequently before I sort of said, no, I think that it's just this relationship with this hospital isn't going to work long term. And my non-compete was such that I had to leave the city in order for me to to get another job. So then I like moved to Raleigh because it was like just a bigger city with more options to do relief. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And the thing about like what you're talking about with these like, hey, manage complex cases and, see crazy things. That's why I've kind of gradually, I think entirely I've been trying to stay within the specialty ER realm, dabble in day practice, dabbling in overnight ER, but it's just like not my jam. Been doing that. And it's honestly, I found that it is a thing that I enjoy it. Like it like speaks to my skill sets and I actually enjoy doing it. So I'm still doing it.
I think locuming, because I dabbled in locuming for the last little while, and I think it's a great way to answer those questions. Like, is it veterinary medicine? Is it this hospital? Is it this specific area that I'm in? Like what it, if you're not sure if you're happy, it's like, okay, what is it?
Exactly. Yes. And you get to choose yes or no. Like I'm going to take this shift based on the pay, the style of medicine, the distance, the hours, whatever, the drama that is associated with that hospital. And you get to create this weird formula in your mind about like, I'm going to weight the drama against the pay. So it's like you kind of like do this equation and then all of a sudden you pop out a number and it's like, cool, I will accept this number for this shift. And that's it. And it's, again, it just goes back to like being able to say, what are you willing to accept?
Yeah, no, there's definitely an element of control for locuming. But yeah, I locum some places and I would be like, I could see clearly like that two people hated each other.
Yeah.
Oh God, that would be so hard if you were part of that, group or that department or whatever, because they hated each other.
Yeah.
But as a locum, I'm not saying it's entertaining, but it was like, you just had a very different, you just be like, okay, like I'll just deal with it, I guess, because I'm only here for 2 weeks or a week or whatever. Like, who cares, right? And then...
Well, and it can be pretty funny. When two people are mad at each other for reasons that are like deeply seated, the actions that happen in like the window that you're going to come in and see are very funny.
Yeah, it is. And it's also funny because a lot of times in academia, like, that saying about the fights are fierce because the stakes are so low, like that. Because...
Right.
Truer words were never spoken because you're like, what? Why do they hate each other? Like, what? What is it? What's going on? Yeah. So
yeah, exactly.
Very amusing. Very amusing if you're not like, it's not part of your daily grind. Okay. So it seems like you have almost like an improvised life.
Yeah.
You're just yes-anding everything that's coming your way. So I want to talk about that.
You're absolutely right. I never thought of it that way.
This is a podcast where we analyze each other. I
I love
just decided and talk about relationships. I don't know. Anyway,
Perfect.
no, I feel like that because okay, I want to get into because when I first met you, you were quite humble. You're like, oh, I did a little improv. We were talking about being on the podcast, and then you sent me your bio, and I'm like, this bio. This is what you say about someone who's now on the cast of Saturday Night Live.
That's funny. Right. I guess
You
it
know what I'm
doesn't.
saying? It's like 7 years of improv, professional improv. Like that's not like a dabbler.
Right. Yeah. And then when I was doing it in Chicago, and yeah, I mean, you're right. Like if I look back on it on paper, then you've quantified it. But, you look back at a life and it's just like, yeah, I did improv. Yeah. I like taught that improv in these schools and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, when you put it on paper, it's like, oh, wow, that is a long period of my life that I've been doing this. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so I want to talk about it because you were at 7 years performing improv professionally at the National Comedy Theater in San Diego. Like,
Yeah.
that's not a dabble. I just want to say. And then you were in Chicago, and then you were at the Improv Olympics, which I think there's people from SNL that have come out of there. I might be wrong. And Second City, which is obviously kind of
Right.
famous. So, okay, let's just talk about. That's just a little small part of your bio, but like, how did you get into improv? How did this happen? What was your kind of like origin before? Because you were doing science, then you ended up doing improv. So let's talk about how that happened.
Yeah, I think I realized at a really young age that I needed both in my life. And that is still true. But like when I was I started playing guitar when I was like 7 or something, like my dad got me a guitar and I started doing that. I started like falling in love with comedy. I mean, as far back as I could remember, like I was, watching Charlie Chaplin movies with my mom. And like I said, like most of the time, it was when my mom was at work, I was like alone. So I just spent so much time, with the TV. Sorry, Mom. She would come home and she would feel the back.
Oh, it's like hot. Yeah.
Right. So I had to like turn it off an hour before she came home. But it was a lot of like, Whose Line Is It Anyway? The British version was on a lot. I Love Lucy, Dick Van Dyke Show. So like, I was always interested in comedy, but I also really loved science. Like this is like, again, early age. I'm like, this is how the brain works. And I'm like reading this, Phantoms of the Brain book. And so it was always like that, back and forth. And I found in my life, if I do one and not the other, then I suffer. Like I'm just completely off balance. So I think it was inevitable. Like I was, in like the school plays and all that kind of stuff. But like the improv thing started when I was in high school, when friends of mine they were starting a troupe and they literally carried me to practice because I'm like, no, like I don't want to stand in front of people. Like I love watching it, right? Like I'm not the guy who performs it. I'm the guy who watches it. And they're like, no, you're the guy who performs it too. And they hoisted me and then they carried me like through the school. And they did that over and over again until one day I said, no, I'll walk, please.
You're like, I like it. I do like it.
Well, I mean, I think I just was embarrassed about, yeah. I mean, I did enjoy it, but I was like, I don't know, self-conscious. I just didn't think I was the guy. They saw something in me that I definitely did not see. And I suppose they are then responsible for everything that followed thereafter because they kept making me go and they kept putting me in shows. So we ended up being in this like high school league the National Comedy Theater, they had a high school league. So someone would come in, a professional would teach you how to do it. All these different schools would then like have head-to-head matches. Chula Vista High would come in and then we would battle it out on the La Jolla High stage and then like do our improv thing and then go. And then we would go out to their schools too. And they kept putting me in shows. And I'm like, I'm not funny enough to be in the shows. But they kept doing it anyway until one day I said something, I guess. I'm not sure. It was like that. It was like in my memory, it was years of me not being very good despite how many times people were putting me in things. And when I got to college, I felt like there was something pretty big missing out of my life because this was like 3 years in high school. So I actually auditioned for the National Comedy Theater because I was still in San Diego and I got on, much to my surprise. They like put me on the team again, much to my surprise. and then I spent the first few years just being a low status characters that never wanted to say anything and all of that. So I mean, that's just how it went. It's not like I was like, oh, I'm so funny. Listen to me. It was like they forced me to do it. And as it turns out, it was actually kind of fun and like a part of me somehow.
I would love it so much if you were like, and then I met Lord Michaels, and then I'm going to be on Saturday Night Live next year. And I don't know how that happened.
It's so interesting.
Crazy.
That's a pipeline you have to like intentionally avoid. And I did. So when I was in Chicago, so like, yeah, fast forwarding to when I was in Chicago, I was like I like took a bunch of classes from each of those institutions that you talked about. And then like eventually you kind of make it onto whatever house teams or whatever. And you have to say, I'm not trying to do this thing, right? Because like I had a relationship. I was pursuing a master's in chemistry at the time, right? Like I had a full-time job. I'm like, I can't go on the road and do the, traveling team. I can't make these sacrifices that then puts me on the SNL stage. And I can't move to New York. Like I have a girl who's moving to Tennessee. So it's like, it's not going to work like that. And I just it wasn't really in my, I don't know, maybe I was just afraid of it in retrospect, but like, it just wasn't in my dream to try to do those things. It was something else. It was just like a part of my life.
Okay. No, I love it. Yeah, I think you'd have to be pretty focused. I mean, there's so many people that want to do that. I just reading your bio, it just struck me. I was like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
You did a lot of performing.
I did do a lot of performing. And I think if I was single, truly, I think if I was single, I probably would have made different choices. And this is something I realized later, like much later. But
right.
Yeah.
When you got your doctor of veterinary medicine.
Right.
Oh. It didn't work out with the girl. Damn it.
I could have been on SNL.
I could have been on SNL. All I got was this lousy DVO.
So when I was screaming as I'm driving down the driveway, I could have been on SNL. But man, I mean, to your point though, it has like changed my entire, well, I don't know if it's changed it. It has shaped my entire life. It's like this interesting skill set. I mean, that I'll try not to talk about forever.
No,
but like,
I want you to talk about. It was going to be my next question. So talk about it.
So like improv is one of these amazing things where you are creating something almost magical with a group of people without really like talking to one another beforehand, right? So on the spot, you're working together to create this thing. And what that requires is supporting each other. It's like saying yes, right? Like someone proposes something to you. You're like, that's a fantastic idea. Let me add on to it. And then they add on to the thing that you just added. And it kind of builds like that. And it's you guys working together. And there's no one star, or there shouldn't be a star of an improv show. And that is like, it's so fun to do that in the moment. Sometimes you create amazing things too. That is like what I would learn in Chicago when you're doing all of these. Man, the stuff that they were doing in Chicago it's on another level. And I guess we can talk about that. But like sometimes you create amazing things. A lot of it, what is joyful for me is that process. Yeah, I mean, of course, like the laughter is great. You're like, making ha-has with your friends. It's really cool. But that is like what has happened in my entire life. Like to your point, right? If an opportunity shows up, I'm like, yeah, I mean, sure. This is why that would work within my value set. Like this is, like when I'm on stage, this is my character. My character would respond in this way. Like in my life, it's like, this opportunity has come to me. I, as a character, am going to respond this way, but I'm going to accept it and we'll see where it goes. It's just taking advantage of opportunities. And then when you're in these relief positions, you're like working with all these new teams and all these new teams, like they all have different skill sets. And you're like, yeah, you're awesome. Like I have to trust you immediately for us to create this like amazing outcome. And I have to get you to trust me. Even just that alone has made it such a really interesting thing to have. But like all that other stuff of like, the forcing yourself to have confidence bit, like coming off of the back wall and participating, that's again a huge life lesson. It's not like you have to be innately confident. You just have to like, feign confidence, like fake it till you make it, that type of thing.
I don't have the improv training that you have, but I've done improv training like when I went to comedy school. And I do think it's very interesting thinking of how you apply it to your profession.
Right.
Kind of like your personal life in some ways, and just sort of saying, yeah, there's an opportunity, like I'm going to do it. Or I think it's perfect for relief work, just what you said, of being able to walk into a new hospital. Maybe you don't know anyone there. And now you're the vet. So you're kind of in charge of at least the cases that you're seeing. And so I think some people really don't like that feeling of like, I don't know the team, I don't know their skill set, I don't know where they're at. And that is challenging, I think, for locums. So
yeah. And as it turns out, that's the piece that I thrive on. Like that's the piece
Really?
that I actually like. Yeah. I'm still a shy person underneath all of it. I'm still like the person who was on the back of the stage to begin with, which maybe does allow me to approach everything with like a little bit of, I don't know. I don't know if it's humble. I'm never going to come in and I'm never going to say like, I'm the best, pay attention to me. I'm like the doctor, the buck ends here, whatever. That's never going to be me. I guess like the point of it is that like, I'm still the person who maybe gets like, I get nervous and anxious about going into a new hospital, even despite all of these years of training. Yeah. But I know that like, that's where the fun is. So it's like, I get anxious when I'm driving to the place. I'm reluctant to pick up like new shifts at new hospitals. But I know that like once I get there, the game is on, right?
Okay.
Like you walk in the door, you're playing a part, in a way. So I have to kind of take all of that anxiety and be like, okay, cool. You're going to sit in the Honda, bring like the doctor in and he'll just be like, hey, how's it going? I'm Matt, what's going on? And here we go. Yeah. So a lot of it is like theatrical. The anxiety that I feel about like, critical cases that are coming in and working with a team that you don't know, that's still there. But I have to put that in the background so that I can be like, okie dokie, like, here we go. Like, I guess he's almost dead. Like, let's start the CPR or waka waka or like, whatever. Yeah.
I just realized actually it is the most improvised career ever because it's emergency and it's locuming.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You don't even know, like, it's not even like you could like, I can look ahead at what's scheduled for me to come in. I can know what appointments I'm seeing or what surgeries I'm doing, but ER doctors, there's a repertoire that you're going to see, like a GDV or foreign body. Like you kind of get that pattern recognition, but you really have no idea.
Right.
It's the most improvised thing you could do.
Right.
Isn't that amazing?
I mean, especially early on. And like, I didn't know, because right now, like, locum relief is like a pretty well-known thing. And like, I think people were always doing it, but at the time that I started, it wasn't as obvious. So I was discovering this thing as well at the same time. And that's what I discovered about it, is that you are basically continually improvising. Because at that point too, you haven't seen all the things that are going to come through the door, right? Like all the different presentations. So years like 2 through 3.5 or whatever were very interesting. Because and like, yeah, I mean, like now, yes, there's a lot more. It's rare that there are, cases that completely befuddle me, right? From an ER perspective, because it's ER, like I'm never going to be diagnosing like crazy conditions on ER. Like that goes to the internist. So like from an ER perspective, it does turn pretty rote, which ultimately is why I'm like, well, I guess I got to figure out what the next thing is. Right. But for me too, like, yes, the medicine is improvised, the teams are improvised, like how I approach it and like what my values are. Like I was figuring all that out as I went. So that was a huge improv piece of my life for sure.
Yeah, I love it. Okay. And I want to talk about the teaching aspect too, because you did a teaching fellowship at Lincoln Memorial, and that was you did a master's in chemistry, then you were doing improv, and then you got into vet school, you went to vet school, and then after vet school, you're like, oh, I want to do this teaching fellowship. So can you talk a little bit about that? Or did I get it right?
Yes. But what's hidden in that is that, when I was in undergrad, even I was working in an elementary school it was like one of these classrooms where if you needed kind of one-on-one or one-on-two help, like, you would come and I would do that. So I did that. And I was the director of the high school league when I was at National Comedy Theater. I did a lot of teaching there. When I went to Chicago, a lot of those teams, like I had a background of improv experience, and there's all these like teams that are coming up and trying to play at, all these venues are across the city. And so I would like coach some of those teams. And then you would teach in the master's program. You would do like because you're a graduate, right? Like a grad student. So you'd like do some undergrad stuff. And then when I was in vet school, I actually taught for Kaplan because like in all of this, I did end up taking the MCAT. So when I moved to Knoxville, like Kaplan contacted me and they're like, hey, you want to teach for us? I'm like, sure. So I taught MCAT like during my entirety of vet school. I guess what I'm saying is that there was always a teaching element in my life.
Okay.
Teaching to me, because I never knew what I wanted, right? Like I would sit, like I said, I would watch all of these amazing people do these amazing things. It's like Robin Williams stand up or, like I Love Lucy doing the bit with the chocolates or the bread or whatever. And I'm like, how is this real? Like these are amazing people doing amazing things. How could I ever do? I didn't realize all the work that it took and like the polishing to get to that point. But I thought like, I feel like I have different skill sets. And if I can use my powers to help other people achieve whatever their greatness is, then I feel pretty good. I never knew what I wanted, but if I could help someone else realize what they wanted, that was amazing to me. So that was always the through line of it. That's actually like when I was doing vet school, I was so exhausted. You know, it's like you have like a day of just staring at PowerPoint slides. It's like, and here's another bacteria, and here another bacteria. I was just like, I would go home. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. But when I would go and I would teach, I would become, you know, I'd like reinvigorate it. Right. So then it would let me get back to getting to class the next day.
All right. And then the fellowship, you did the fellowship. Does that make you I'm sorry, it's a little different system, I think. Are you a teacher? Like, could you teach if you wanted to at a school?
Everyone's a teacher.
I know. But like, I guess that.
No, I mean, who knows? So when I graduated vet school, I actually made a proposal that I like wrote out and I submitted to the deans that said like, hey, you should hire me to teach these like rudimentary classes because, by the way, like the teachers aren't great. Like they're good at what they're doing, but they're not great at like the teaching bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my philosophy was, and it still is, that, you know, you can't stand in front of an audience of 100+ people and pretend that it's not theater. It's theater. Education is theater. And if you can't get your audience on board, you're never going to relay your message appropriately. So I like had this whole proposal and I like submitted that and they're like, this is interesting. We're not going to pay you to do it. So I think like technically a DVM can just teach, right? Like the fellowship didn't really, like the purpose of the fellowship was more to just get involved with education research and, you know, what is happening within a vet school on that level. I thought I would actually end up staying at LMU, but like life stuff, I was just like, this is not for me at this time. But yeah, it has given me no additional credentialing, but it was definitely a great experience.
Okay. Well, I think it'll come back. I feel like it will come back.
Sure.
Somehow.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Or not. I don't know.
Who knows? I've realized, at least for my life, you can't necessarily engage in an activity because of what's going to happen on the other side. You have to engage in the activity because you want to do the activity.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's going to lead you towards a life that you want to live. So whether or not I get something because of, you know, I got a fellowship on my resume is irrelevant. I do know that I met a bunch of people during that time that I still know, and they're all sort of in that realm. I know that I gained a lot of experience during that. And I don't know, maybe it'll be useful kind of moving forward.
Okay. I shouldn't have asked that question now that you're saying that. Because when I went to comedy school, like, especially surgeons are like, what are you doing with it? And I would just be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Exactly.
Can I get back to you? I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I'll get back to you in 10 years. Then I'll tell you what I did with it.
Maybe nothing. Maybe this podcast is it. I don't know. This might be the pinnacle right now.
Exactly. This is it. It's all downhill
moment. It's all...
This is the apex.
It's right now. Talking to Matt. I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine. Okay. So you have a book coming out. Do you want to talk about that?
I realized that in all of this relief medicine thing, a lot of it was figuring out how to do it. This was true when I was doing improv too, like especially back in the National Comedy Theater. It's like Whose Line Is It Anyway, right? Where you have these like games with gimmicks and stuff like that. It's like, oh, and this one will be like picking up random lines that are strewn across the stage and then say them and then somehow justify why we said it, right? Like there's a thing that we're like, transposing on top of this scene. I actually created a manual when I was doing improv about how to approach each of those games and like why the strategies worked. So I would like analyze. I've always been like super analytical about the comedy. It's like, why does that joke work? And that process is super fun for me. So similarly, when I was doing this relief thing, like part of the game, right, is figuring it out as you go and figuring out like what you want from it. And that discovery ends up being basically what the book is about. So it's like a memoir / instruction manual for if you want to do this thing, this like locum thing. And it acts as, I mean, for me, the purpose of it is to act as the kind of the end of an era. Like, yes, now I have a son now, like as it turns out. So I do have to get off the road. But even before that, before we knew we were having a kid, it was like, I think I'm winding down. Like Seinfeld ended at the top, right? Like they were the #1 show on TV. They're like, I'm out of here. I wanted to do that as well with this. And so this is kind of a recounting of those experiences.
I love that. I like that you're like, I have a kid now. You're like, yes, and.
Yes.
I'm a dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. Okay. And you have a podcast called The Greatest Profession,
Yes.
which I want to hear what you have to say about that, because it's lovely. I love the podcast.
You
And
were on it. What do you
I was on it.
what do you have to say about it?
You know what I would say about it, but then I want to know what you say about it, is there is some negativity going on in our profession. And I don't know if sounds like you didn't get the memo.
I get very few.
You didn't hear about the negative things, which I don't even want to I want to shield you from that, but or maybe you're just better. I don't know. You just kind of like, oh, I'm unfettered and it's flexible and veterinary medicine's great and it's the greatest profession. So, I mean, just having anyone have that perspective and be positive about veterinary medicine, and also just, say, well, this is what I can do and this is what I can offer, and not really worry about getting bogged down. I don't know. I could have used you
Interesting.
about 25 years ago. Would have been good.
So first off, thank you for that. When I started the podcast, it was actually the greatest profession. Like, is it? Because it was started as so many of us hear it constantly. Like, this is the greatest profession on earth. And then you're like sitting at work and you're like, really? It doesn't seem like it. And like, those guys seem like they're having a great time. But what has been really fascinating, and I don't necessarily believe that it's not. I agree that there are plenty of people in this profession that are not having a good time, right?
Yeah.
So it was sort of that. Like, the whole purpose of starting it was to just talk to people about their human lives and their experiences within the profession. I don't care so much about the clinical bit. I just want to know how you as a human being how you're doing, right? And that was born from during COVID, like during rounds, you would talk to people and we're all just trying to keep it together and figure it out. And the hospitals are going through some major changes. And I just feel like we took so little time to just sit and talk about like how each other was actually doing. So I found that those conversations were really informative and helpful for me. And I thought, well, if I could just record this and put it out, maybe it would be beneficial for others to know that there's other people going through the same things as you. These are some strategies that maybe they've kind of used. But what's fascinating about it is that over time, in having the conversation, we always sort of end up in this thing of it is the greatest profession. Like, people, as I'm talking to them, if you would talk to them in any other, just like at a bar, just talking about their lives, we probably wouldn't have gotten to that point. But like, by the end, there's so many people who will say, this really is the greatest profession and this is why. So I've become a lot more optimistic because of the experience, but that was not necessarily the original intent.
Oh, so it was question mark, but now it's period.
Yeah, now it's an exclamation point. I don't know.
Exclamation mark. Well, that's awesome.
I love the people stories. I mean, truly, I'm learning so much from just listening to other people and talking to other people about what they're doing and how they're doing. To your point, right? Like, how we all approach this career, it varies. And some people are very much like, I guess I'm a small animal doctor now who works during day practice, in middle Kentucky or, whatever. And it's like, this is my life. Like, well, it doesn't have to be. And there's plenty of people who have felt the same way, who have just, picked up a suitcase and thrown it on a boxcar and like took it somewhere. Maybe not so many people who have thrown suitcases on boxcars, but who have changed their lives because they are just unhappy in their thing.
Yeah. I definitely would encourage any veterinarian, because I do think veterinarians can get stuck. And anyone actually who doesn't have to be a veterinarian, who feels kind of stuck, to recognize that you can still make money, you can do other things. Like, it is a versatile degree, but most people don't feel versatile for whatever reason, even though it's just a science degree. Like, that's, in the end of the day, it's a medical degree. Like, that's all it is. You can do a lot with it, but people get kind of stuck.
And it's in high demand. And I'm not even saying that you have to leave, right? Like, leave your current position in order to do, something else. Because as it turns out, like, most of the positions are probably going to have similar things. It's not always the case, but there's always going to be something. The question is like, it's like in rents. It's like, I'm looking for baggage that goes with mine. That's the idea. Like, they're all going to be bad in some way, right? But they're going to be good in other ways. And so part of it is sort of switching and sort of saying like, cool, but what's good and what's great about what it is that I'm doing right now? Like, yeah. If I focused on like the times where I'm really upset about not knowing what the diagnosis is, and like the euthanasias, and when the teams aren't working very well, and when I'm like overloaded with cases and I don't feel like I'm, supported, or I'm like writing histories and I'm staying hours and hours after my shift for things that I didn't necessarily need to do. if I focused on those things, right, like, yeah, it would be a pretty crappy profession. That is just a piece of it. And it's recognizing all the other pieces. And for me, it's like the other pieces far outweigh, that piece. Sometimes it's about sort of refiguring and looking at what about it is nice. What can you focus on that you actually enjoy? Try to do more of those things. And maybe the balance is in the other way. And then you got to like go to, wherever, Wisconsin, because you like cheese, or Packers, maybe. But I'm just, you don't have to like uproot your entire life to be happy. So, I guess what I'm saying.
I think we should start a sub podcast. We call it The Worst Profession and just have people just look for miserable people. What do you think?
I think it's good. And then we'll just like, and then it's like taking those like turtles and like just setting them out and just seeing them race. You can like see what the viewership does.
I think The Worst Profession might be, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. So I asked this question of a lot of people who are healthcare professionals who do comedy, but you're a bit different because you've had a totally different path. And I think you're going to continue to do that. But where do you see going with your comedy? Is it something you still want to, I know the podcast is creative and I think you're creative, right? You're musical and you're a creative person, but I guess, so maybe I'll broaden that question. Like, where do you see the creative side of you going in the future?
It is comedy. I mean, it's like getting back into those roots. Right now, starting this, so I'm like starting a practice. Everything has been approved. I don't own anything yet. So so it's in that phase. So I'm like trying to focus on that. And I cannot wait to getting back to like the sitting and writing bit again. I have this idea that I've got a couple of ideas that I would really love to work on. The one that I think would be super fun is to create do you know the thing Playing for Change? Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
So basically it's like this is music, but it's like these guys who, you'll find a guitarist in Nigeria and a drummer in Saudi Arabia and a singer in Israel. And it's just like you play a song, it's a cover song, but you play a song and all of them are doing those parts and they put it together and then they release it. So one, super interesting. But doing something like that where I can do basically a rock opera for the veterinary school experience, because it's hilarious. Like the amount of suffering, it's so painful. And when you look on it afterwards, you're like, oh, it wasn't so bad. But I just like distinctly remember at the time it was terrible. And so there is an idea that I have where I would love to create a rock opera about the veterinary school experience using vet school students to like fill in all the pieces and we kind of like write it and then we film it in those separate things and put it together.
I love that.
Yeah, stuff like that. And that would be, comedy. I mean, all the stuff that I've created, unfortunately, is comedy. Even the book is like mostly comedy. But yeah, I don't know how to escape it. And those things, like me putting this on hold right now is so hard for me. I like put all my guitars in the closet and it's just like, I can feel them being like, when? Like now? So in terms of where it goes, I would love to create collaborative projects with other people. And I think that this is a fun field to do it in. I don't necessarily see myself kind of stepping outside of it in the near future, but that's what I see.
Awesome. I'm very excited to see what you do next.
Yeah. I got a couple songs too. I was actually I know you asked me to like send you stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And
oh, you want to play a song? What did you want to do?
That song that I put on the website, the on hold thing, it's basically like hey, this is the experience of the ER veterinarian or of anybody who's sitting on hold with the ASPCA poison control and they go slightly mad. So that was supposed to be the beginning of like a whole series of songs, some of which are written, some of which are like in the idea stage, and then some of which are literally just an idea. But as you can imagine, so what happened was the practice. Like this just like fell into my lap. I was looking for, right, exactly.
Yeah. So again, like.
Right, just like everything else.
Probably were like, we weren't even trying to have a baby.
We weren't. Right. All of it is just like, oh, okay, cool. Like, and does this fit in my like worldview? Like, yeah. So like the practice is one that I would be. Basically, I was trying to buy another practice that fell through. The people who were funding it were like, but we would fund you to do a startup. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. So I've like kind of mapped out this startup and that has taken up a lot of time, right? So like business plans and spreadsheets and getting funding. And like now I got to get equipment bids before you do the appraisal. And it's like a whole list of things. So all of that, it's like, if you can see, I have like a little Post-it or like pinboard or whatever right here. And there's like all the ideas that are waiting for me to write.
Yeah.
So that music will occur. It's just I got to take it here and then put it here. I need to get in stuff. It's like part of it is I just don't like doing it by myself, right? Like I like it. There's a cool process of it. I've written like the monologues and things like that. But it's best when you do it with other people. That's the hardest part, right? Like, especially as an adult, to find anybody who has a common interest is effectively impossible. But like, especially like in your city that you can like sit down and like play and like do stuff with, it just logistically, it ends up being hard. So then I do it, by myself.
I'm just going to put myself out there as a joke writing friend.
Great.
Anytime, over Zoom. It's a little bit different genre, but if you ever want.
That's true. I actually sent a thing to, the Bird Bath podcast. It's like a weekly news podcast. And I've always had this idea of doing like a weekly veterinary comedy news, like, like Weekend Update or whatever. One of my favorite classes when I was at the Improv Olympic was writing jokes, where you'd sit with a newspaper and then you'd like write 20 jokes and you'd pitch them to the room.
Yeah.
That was so fun. So that I like wrote some jokes off of one and I sent it to him and he's like, dude, if you ever wanted to do this like for real. So I don't know. These are all like ideas that I would love to do. It's just about sort of like, yes. And also I want to be present in my house from 5 to 8 p.m. while the kid is awake, right?
The baby.
None of that will interfere, right? So.
Well, I'm just putting it up there.
Appreciate it. I love
whatever. Okay. And we're almost at the last question, even though I could talk to you for a long time, but I will talk to you again. But the last question of the podcast, you might know, is the same for every guest. I'm trying to get Ken Jeong to come on Co-Medicine. So far, not going so great, but I'll be honest.
But like, have you gotten to the stage of like restraining order or like how?
We're not quite there. Okay. I did have a friend. He's like a journalist. He's an investigative journalist. And he goes, where does he live?
Yeah.
He's like, I think you should do an episode where you go to LA and maybe not go to his house, but go where he is and wait for him. I was like, that's a great idea. Because he does that. He's an investigative journalist and he like chases like people with his microphone. We're not quite there. We're more on the like emails to his people, tagging on Instagram level. And then this question. And I don't know, you're charmed. So maybe it'll just work out. If you could just speak to Ken and just invite him to come as a guest on Co-Medicine, that would be great. Yeah.
I mean, do you want me to like now, or do you want me to go? Because I do know him. I'm kidding. I don't know him.
Well, you could do both.
Oh, I've been watching Community, but I've been watching alone. Thinking about how neat it would be if we could get Ken Jeong on Co-Medicine. Just LT, Great Chino, and me. I've been watching The Masked Singer, and I am feeling exposed. Vulnerable, begging down on my knees. If you called, I'd say I know exactly who this is. And we would laugh, ho, 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 tee. How much time must you spend with Joel McHale? There's so much more to life than this. We'd be more fun than Galifianakis or Apatow. I bet they can't pronounce choledocholithiasis. Oh, I've been watching The Hangover, and I had a sobering thought. What if you said no? I know you're rich, and I know you are Asian, but you'd be crazy not to come on this show. The greatest podcast you know. A pretty good podcast you probably don't know. The only podcast about medical professionals that also do comedy, and perhaps one day you'll come on this show.
That's it, Ken. All right. I think that's going to do it. I think it's going to be, I'm actually curious if I ever get him on, I'll be like, whose invitation was it?
I
And
actually
he's gonna
really
say
I
it was
love
Matt.
the investigative journalist thing, except you like go and then when he's there, just pretend you don't know who he is. Just have a third party come in and just be like, oh man, gosh, this is amazing. Have you heard of this person?
Oh yeah, no, he wanted me to like wait like outside
I
the
know.
Masked Singer and like wait for him. And he's like, he probably comes out. And I'm like, anyway, I'm not quite there.
But one day you will be, and that's what's important.
Maybe season 3. A little trip to LA. All right. Well, Matt, I am so glad I met you. The best thing about this podcast is honestly just the people I've met, and I'm so thrilled that I got to meet you. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Same, thank you.
Good luck with everything that you're doing and all the things that are happening in your life, which I honestly can't wait to see what happens next.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. Super fun being on. Thank you for having me.
And that wraps up another episode of Co-Medicine. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to give a shout out to Mark Edwards, who wrote the music for this podcast. He is a very funny comedian, also a musician who writes music that makes me laugh. I don't know. Is that a thing? I don't know. He can do that. Also want to shout out to Heather McPherson of Twisted Spur Media, who's our producer and editor, who makes everything work. I could not do this podcast without her. And I want to thank you for listening and for sticking with us in season 2. If you're new to Co-Medicine, welcome. If you've been listening since the beginning, welcome back. It's great to have you here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share and like and give us a review. If you didn't like it, I don't know what you're still doing here. If you didn't like this podcast, you could do nothing. Nothing would be good. I had another question. Do you like to be called Matt or Matthew?
Matt.
Matt. Okay, that's good. I'm glad I asked because I was going to call you Matthew. And then is it Asciutto?
Not even a little bit. Yeah. It's a sciutto, like prosciutto.
Oh, Asciutto. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. It's Italian.
That's fine. It is Italian. Yeah. I mean, it's like, this is my whole life. I actually, I was like on the fence about when I, had a kid. I'm like, do I give him my name or do we start with a new name? Because my whole life, it's like, hey, Matt Asciutto, Asciutto. Or like when I go into rooms, it's like, hey, Matt Asciutto. Or it's like, hey, I'm Dr. Asciutto. And they're like, look at my name tag or whatever. I'm like, that's not going to help you. So,
It'd be funny if the whole time I called you Matthew Asciutto for the
Asciutto.
entire podcast.
Well, then I could come back again as Matt Asciutto.
So Matt Asciutto, like prosciutto,
Like prosciutto.
which apparently I can't say either. Matt Asciutto. Okay.
Yeah, it's like a shoe and then a toe.
Toe.
That's the thing.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just reinforcing your anxiety about your son. And his name.
This will be the conversation he has in 30 years.
Yeah. Asciutto, like a shoe and a toe.